सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Everywhere around him, the great playwright Ratan Thaim saw the frenzied madness that precedes the apocalypse. A monkey, the survivor of the Ramayana who had gone on to fight in the Great World War, was crying in front of a photograph of Darwin. A curse prevented the monkey from becoming a man, but the priest who promised to help him had become a follower of Mao Zedong. The Kauravas had won the battle of Kurukshetra, and the streets were awash with preachers offering new religions at cut price. Ever since savage ethnic cleansing began in Manipur last month, claiming over 100 lives and the homes of tens of thousands of people, Thaim's surrealist poetry is providing a more accurate guide to reality than the insights of administrators, intelligence officials, or experts. The government of India had turned insurgent groups into state-funded ventures since 2006, paying thousands of demobilized Kuki insurgents 6,000 rupees a month for staying in camps. The backlog of payments was adroitly maneuvered to transform surrendered insurgents into electoral campaigners. Large-scale contracts were handed out to elites in all communities in an effort to corrupt them into compliance. The state discreetly looked away from endemic drug trafficking and extortion. As successive governments claimed they were making peace, they were actually manufacturing hell. There are many narratives which collide in Manipur, but the story of why the Kuki have gone to war helps understand the unfolding conflict. It has something to do with the British. Think of Manipur as a bowl with the Meitei in the valley and various tribes around the hills. The British confronted a crisis and India learned all the wrong lessons from it. Faced with grinding shortages of workers to serve the carnage of Ypres and Flanders, historian Radhika Singla records, Imperial Britain needed Indian bodies. The Maharaja of Manipur, among other native rulers, provided Nagas, Lushai and Meitei, communities who, as colonial army officer Leslie Shakespeare noted, had in many cases done this kind of work for government before in border expeditions and knew the work. The rewards included a lifetime exemption from forced free labor for the Maharaja. Enslavement, you see, had been embedded into the monarchical order long before Manipur was annexed into British India in 1891 and then allowed to become a nominally independent state. The keeping of human chattel by the king ended, but the British continued to use forced labour for their own ends. The peoples of the hills, anthropologist James Scott has taught, are practitioners of what he calls the art of not being governed, skillfully using the mountain terrain to avoid taxation by valley-based nation-states. The hillmen used their mountain redoubts to avoid state slavery, raids, conscription, taxation and forced labour. Even though colonial discourse cast the Kukis as savage plunderers, historian Yankumang Guite has pointed out that the reality was considerably more complex. The hill tribes often helped the princes of the plains fight their wars and provided refuge to them during invasions from Burma. The Kuki also ran a crude taxation system, charging protection money from cultivators and traders operating on their lands. The relentless demand made by the Great War for human bodies, though, led Britain to turn to the Kuki Hills, regions which were well outside the control of the Imphal-based princes. The Kuki were less than enthused by their first great encounter with the modern world and decided to fight back. Local uprisings against imperial power had broken out in what are today called the Chittagong Hill Tracts As early as 1845, 1871, there were fresh insurrections in 1872 and 1888 and the Anglo-Chin War of 1889-1890. Late in the spring of 1917, the Kuki chiefs met at the village of Jampi and sacrificed a sacred Mithun cow to vow they would not travel to France. Legend has it that bullets were sent from village to village as talismans seeking the support of various tribal chieftains. The empire, though, was equally determined to ensure compliance and ordered the Kukis to surrender their guns. It is essential to the administration of a country people with uncivilized tribes that they shall be made to understand that legitimate orders cannot be disobeyed with impunity and that defiance brings certain punishment, political agent J.C. Higgins asserted. Under the shadow of the Great First World War, the Anglo-Kuki War began with raids against ethnic Nepali cattle farmers settled there by the British in the Kuga Valley near what is now Churachandpur. The settlement had been a simmering source of resentments since the land was among the best available to the local tribes for cultivating rice. Elsewhere, villages were fortified in anticipation of the inevitable counterattacks by superior British forces, and food stocks were dispersed and carefully hidden away. Early on, the British believed the Kukis were being inspired by an ethnic Meitei pretender to the throne, someone who claimed magic powers that would protect the tribes. The so-called primitive fighters were, however, better prepared than the British thought. Like in other little wars or insurgencies, the odds were stacked against the rebels, who had to depend on their tactical skills and wits. The British had anticipated that when confronted with force, Kuki opposition would collapse. Instead, the insurgents melted away on contact. Even though the Kukis had small numbers of firearms, the superb scholarship of Guite and Tongkolal Haukep records, the tribes had learned to extract nitrates from the excrement of bats in caves. These nitrates were then mixed with charcoal and saltpeter and made into gunpowder. The British fought back by pushing large numbers of children and women into concentration camps. The Assam Rifles, former Governor Robert Reed recorded, sought to coerce the Kuki insurgents to surrender through these means. These camps were also used to torture suspects with lashings and beatings. Elsewhere, entire villages were burned down and crops looted in an effort to snuff out rebellion by starvation and punishment. These barbaric colonial era practices, the eminent Indian Administrative Services officer Vijendra Jaffa has recorded, remained part of the lexicon of counterinsurgency in the Northeast until well into the 1960s, embittering relationships between New Delhi and the region's people for generations to come. Following the Anglo-Kuki War, an unquiet peace was eventually restored in the hills. The British had shown they could crush the Kuki rebellion, but at an economic cost the empire did not wish to pay, at an even heavier moral cost. The Anglo-Kuki War wasn't, of course, the only tragedy imposed by the empire on the region. The hideous miscalculations that led to the Manipur War of 1891, documented brilliantly by Caroline Keene, fractured society, opening the way for both religious nationalism and communism. The separate fighting in regions like Nagaland and Mizoram was particularly ferocious. Assam and Manipur saw a variety of ethnic nationalist and communist-inspired movements. Lacking deep political legitimacy in the region, New Delhi utilized the imperial tools of deal-making and coercion. Freedom to make things even more complex gave some ethnic formations territories where they could exercise political power, but left others, scholar Telsing Haukip observes, out in the cold. Equitable economic prosperity, education, and a politics that looked beyond ethnic contractors could have built a different kind of Northeast, writer Sudeep Chakravarti has noted. The process of democratization could have devolved power and agency to entwined communities, allowing them to resolve their differences. Instead, electoral politics served to harden and consolidate antagonistic ethnic identities. a process which has reached its grim climax in Manipur today, where rival militia, each with political backing, are engaged in pushing entire peoples off their land. Learning all the wrong lessons from the empire, independent India chose to rule the northeast with cash and coercion. Like in so much of the country, communities have responded to the absence of genuine democratic institutions by sharpening group boundaries and raising walls of identity. The fate of Manipur is a cautionary tale of what could happen across much of India tomorrow, and it is a test of our republic's ability to prevent that outcome. I'm Praveen Swami, and I'm National Security Editor of ThePrint. ThePrint's journalism and opinion relies on deep, on-ground coverage of the kind you won't find in much of India's media today. But good journalism costs money. Many of you are already subscribers to ThePrint. I'd request those of you who haven't considered subscription to please subscribe by clicking on the link in the description below. Thank you again for watching Security Code this week.